Let's welcome Dr. Hugh Ross back to the stage. Dr. Ross. Here you go, Hugh, right there. Okay. Well, Dr. Ross, I'm going to try to ask you these questions. If I can read them, I'm sure I know you'll answer them. And then also, too, if you have a question, you're like, wow, I have a question about Charles Darwin. Just text your question to 32898, and they will bring me your question right here. So, Dr. Ross, the first one, this is from Heather, okay? Isn't it true that the casual agent that created space and time could simply be something else we haven't discovered yet? That is a simple chemical or quantum reaction that caused space and time, not a God.
Well, that's actually addressed by none other than Lawrence Krauss in his book, A Universe from Nothing, because he speculates that maybe some kind of quantum event brings the universe into existence.
Yes.
And I'll give you a short answer, but I got a 16-page review of his book on our website.
Great.
At reasons.org. Here's a short answer. Yes, you can get virtual particles popping into existence out of the quantum space-time foam of the universe, but they have to go back to the quantum space-time foam before the human observer can detect it. We call them virtual particles. And what Lawrence Krauss is saying, well, if we can do that with a virtual particle, why not the whole universe? But the greater the mass you try to bring into existence from the quantum space-time foam, the faster it must return. And the return time for something as big as the observable universe is 10 to the minus 120 seconds. And no matter how we interpret the days of creation, we all agree the universe is older than 10 to the minus 120 seconds.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Good.
Here's another one from Cynthia. This is via Twitter. Is there any scientific discovery that could be made that would make you not believe in God? It's a good question.
Very good question, and Paul actually addresses it by saying if we can prove that Jesus did not rise bodily from the dead, then that will disprove our Christian faith. I can give you a couple scientifically. If we could prove that the universe did not have a beginning, that would be catastrophic, in my opinion, to the Christian faith. Or if we could prove that we human beings are no different from the animals, that would be catastrophic to the Christian faith. But I think it's important for people who hold belief systems different than ours that they also identify things that would be catastrophic to their position.
Yes.
And I mentioned tonight the Cambrian explosion. A number of evolutionary biologists who take a non-theistic perspective have admitted in print that we're in trouble on the Cambrian explosion, and that the more we learn about the Cambrian explosion, the more challenging it is to sustain a materialist interpretation of Earth's life. And so that, in my opinion, would be a catastrophic discovery. The origin of life is another one. We now know that life originates without the benefit of prebiotic molecules. If you don't have building block molecules, you do not have a naturalistic possible solution for the origin of life. So the idea, maybe we're going to discover something. Yes. Well, we already know that the origin of life happened in a geologic instant of time without the benefit of any building blocks. That right away tells you there's no possibility of a naturalistic explanation.
Wow. You know, something else I was thinking about, Dr. Ross, when you were talking, I love animals, and I guess this is true, where you were going is dogs would be those soulish animals. How would you describe dogs? Because I love dogs.
Well, the amazing thing about dogs is God designed them first of all, they got very flexible DNA. So we can actually take dogs and design them the way we want to. So for example, we got new breeds that tolerate clothing because there's all these ladies that want to put clothes on their dogs. But they didn't start that way. But the other thing about dogs is they have this capacity to take on facial expressions. And so they look at us,
yes,
and they
do.
figure out, dogs really want to please us.
That's
and
true.
So they will put a look on their face to please us. And there's a research paper that came out of Boston College just a couple of years ago, and was addressing the question, do dogs experience morality like we human beings do? And they're making the point that dogs will take on a guilty look when they do something bad.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Well, I think I've seen it with my dogs as well.
What kind of dogs do you have, Dr. Ross?
Well, we've had a number of dogs, but probably the one that was the greatest at demonstrating the guilty look was our Dachshund. I mean, he had that down pat.
Really?
But what they discovered at Boston College, it's got nothing to do with what the dog has done. It's all about pleasing the human owner. And the dog realized, okay, my owner wants me to look guilty, I'll look guilty. And what they discovered is they would actually have the dog do something that was actually good and not bad, and the owner would put on a guilty look, the dog would put on a guilty look. I mean, it was all based on the scolding attitude of the owner.
Unbelievable.
So dogs are not moral, only we human beings
That's
are
true.
moral.
I know. I love our dogs. You're right. Mike, here's what Mike says. What would you say are the top recent discoveries that have been the most impactful when witnessing to other scientific minds about the existence of God, and what's the best way to present these?
Well, the ones I've found recently to be most impactful, I mean, I told you in my talk that we already have the leading atheistic astronomers and physicists conceding a deistic worldview, but not a personal God. So I like to share the latest scientific evidence that establishes it must be a personal God. And the book of Job, it tells us that darkness is a real thing. It's not just the lack of light, it's a substance. Today we know that is correct. 99.73% of the universe is dark stuff. But the quantity of that dark stuff and the location of the dark stuff in the universe is where we find the most spectacular scientific evidence that God has designed the entire universe for the specific benefit of human beings. And the degree of fine-tuning design we see just in dark energy, for example, exceeds the very best example of human engineering achievement by a factor of 10 to the 97 times, which means that the one that created and designed this dark energy is at least 10 trillion times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than the smartest and best educated of us human beings. Which means it must be a personal being, because only a personal being can manifest intellect, knowledge, creativity, and power.
Wow. Brilliant. Here's what Trevor writes. Do you believe there is a relationship between creationism and evolution, or do you reject the theory of evolution?
Well, it depends how you define evolution. I mean, I'm a physicist. For a physicist, evolution is change with respect to time. And notice Genesis 1 teaches change with respect to time. God does things on day 1 that's different from what he does on day 3, 4, and day 6 follows after day 5. So when biologists say we have overwhelming evidence that the theory of evolution is correct, what is your definition? And often they'll say, well, we know that life has been here for a long time. It started off simple and became complex. Well, guess what? Genesis teaches the same thing. The difference is who or what is responsible for those changes.
Yes.
Evolutionism is the idea that it's strictly natural process that's responsible for all the changes that we see, which is why I like to take these evolutionary biologists and begin with the origin of life. I mean, they're stuck right there at the very beginning. Then you got the Cambrian explosion, and by the way, there's numerous explosions where we see these mass extinction events followed by mass speciation events. Now, the problem with evolutionary biologists, they believe that the physics of the solar system has not changed. But as an astronomer, I can tell you the sun is 25% brighter today than it was when God first created life. Our planet is rotating 5 times more slowly. The radiation environment has changed. The moon has changed in terms of its position. Now, you need different life at different times for that changed physics. And so life that's appropriate on day 1 will not be able to compensate for the increasing brightness of the sun on day 5. And we see this in Psalm 104. It's a property of all life to die off, but God recreates and renews the face of the earth. So what I share with my biologist friends, only a mind that knows the future physics of the solar system will know which life to remove from planet Earth and which new life to replace that old life with in order to perfectly compensate for all the changes in the physics of the solar system. Because it's life that controls the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so as the sun gets brighter, by making sure you got the right life on the planet at the right time, you can draw the greenhouse gases down so that the temperature in the surface of the Earth remains ideal for life. But once again, only a mind is going to get it right. Mm-hmm. A mindless process will make the planet quickly permanently sterile.
Luke writes, that's a good name, Luke, isn't it? Oh, they're piling in. I love it. Luke, regarding the Tower of Babel, well, we might want to explain that. You can explain that as well. I've total confidence in you, Dr. Ross. Regarding the Tower of Babel, do you see this as a supernatural event resulting in the different races and/or languages instantaneously, or do you understand it more as a natural event where the races and languages diverged over a period of time?
Well, we have in the Bible the declaration that humanity was in one place. And it was God's intent all along as he spoke to Adam and Eve, multiply and fill the earth. They didn't do it. What we see in Genesis 11, God had to forcibly scatter humanity over the face of the earth. And we actually have DNA evidence that tells us that yes, humanity started off in one locale, then there was a period of very aggressive migration. The DNA evidence even shows us the migration routes, whereby humanity went out of the Middle East, down the south shore of Asia into Japan and China, and then along the west coast of North and South America to populate North and South America, Australia, etc. So we now know that the Bible's historical account got it right. But also the DNA evidence tells us as humanity went from one locale out to these different locales, they began to, let me give you an example. You go to Africa, and it was Livingstone that discovered this. He went into the jungles of the Congo and discovered there was a tribe of pygmies where the average height was 3.5 feet, living just a few miles from a tribe of giants where they were 7 feet tall. They would not intermarry, and therefore they began to develop DNA differences. And this is what we saw in the migration, that the simple migration was enough to establish the racial differences. And people exaggerate this. The truth is, the Bantus and the Zulus living in South Africa have greater genetic differences than the Asians and the whites and the Indians elsewhere in the world. And so we make a big deal about color difference.
Yeah.
But there really isn't that much differentiation in the DNA that's manifested by all the races. So you really don't need a direct supernatural intervention to get the racial distinctives. We're not that different. And by the way, racial distinctives are rapidly disappearing as now the races are beginning to intermarry.
That's so true. Dr. Ross, here's a question that I have. I know we have so many students who attend fellowship, and I know a big change, a big bout with doubt that they have is when they go off to college, you know, the proverbial biology, the science classes, and then also too the different specials sometimes that'll be on television that push the agenda of the atheist or those who just want to remain a skeptic their entire life. What would you tell a young person to do? Let's say they're in high school now, thinking about college. I mean, how do we, how do we prepare ourselves for that?
Well, a good passage is 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready with good reasons for the hope within you, but present them with gentleness, respect, and a clear conscience. And it's crucial to remember that people pay more attention to your demeanor than they do your evidence.
That's right.
But you need to develop these good evidences. And the way I've found to develop those evidences is to engage the skeptics. Find out what their issues are. I mean, the first time I engaged skeptics at Caltech, I didn't have good answers, but it told me these are the things I need to get answers for. So
that's brilliant, Dr. Ross. I love that.
So, then you find out what the questions are, then go to people that have done the research or do the research yourself. And I love this church because evidently this is a church where you encourage people to
Yes, we
ask
do.
their hardest questions.
Yes.
And that's what church is all about.
That's what church is all about. And what Dr. Ross said, I don't know if you heard the series we just did. I just want to take them back several weeks. I did a series called The Table. And I talked about 3 chairs around the table. The first chair, I said, should be the skeptic, those who are far away from God. And I truly believe, Dr. Ross, as you said, that's what the church is all about. When you engage people who are far away from God, skeptics, whatever, and maybe you don't know, many times you don't know the answers to their questions, it causes you to think deeper and to preach more creatively and distinctively, relationally, et cetera. So I totally agree. So the awesome thing about his resources is, I mean, if I'm a young person, especially, or anybody, you can know that, and then you're never gonna know what this genius knows. You can, though, refer someone, hey, I have a book, read this book. I do that often when I can't
Well, for
fully answer a
example,
question that's not about Florida State or bass fishing.
the vast majority of our book and DVD sales are people buying it to give to non-Christians. And so I know a woman, for example, who hasn't read any of her books, but she gives away hundreds of them because she knows that this is a person that needs the content.
That's good. Okay, here's another one. All right. This is from Phoenix. I like that name, Phoenix. My non-Christian friends always ask me about Noah's Ark. How do I explain that to them?
Good question. And they need to realize the Bible teaches a worldwide flood, but not a global flood. There's a difference. Worldwide means the world of humanity. 2 Peter 2. The world of the ungodly was flooded. Well, the ungodly didn't make it to Antarctica, so no need for God to flood Antarctica. I don't think there were emperor penguins on board the ark. Moreover, what does it tell us in Genesis? You're to take 2 of every basar on board the ark. That's a Hebrew word that means soulish animal that is associated with human beings. After all, these are the only animals that can be negatively impacted by our sinful behavior. I mean, you can sin as much as you want in front of a cockroach, it will not change the behavior of the cockroach.
That's the truth.
I mean, it just does its thing.
That's hilarious.
But I mean, if you mistreat and abuse your cow, don't be surprised if that cow becomes abusive towards other creatures and to human beings.
That's right.
And that's in the Levitical law, that a human being is responsible for the behavior of their animals. And so in terms of 2 of every kind, we're probably looking at maybe 800 or 900 or a few thousand pairs of animals on board the ark. No problem for 8 people to take care of them and feed them for 2 years. And once we realize that we're looking at a flood that wipes out all of humanity and not all life, then you don't have any scientific things to be concerned about. But I also believe that those of us who believe in a local flood have believed in too local of a flood. Our latest book, Navigating Genesis, brand new, we talk about a new model of the flood, where we have the flood filling up the entire Persian Gulf, all of Mesopotamia, and a really good chunk of southern Iran and Arabia, wiping out all of humanity. And it's also in the context of the last ice age, because a lot of skeptics will say the date is ridiculous. I would agree, it's not 5,500 years ago. We know it's in the last ice age because the text tells us it took 7.5 months for the water to drain out of that area, which meant it had to be during an epoch when the mountains around the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia were loaded with snow and ice. They're not anymore, but they were during the last ice age.
Wow. What a great answer. I mean, all I can say is, wow, I wish I could say something intelligent. Whoa, interesting, phenomenal. Here's another one from Ryan. Why are apes and primates so closely related to us in DNA sequences? One time, Dr. Ross, I went on a fishing trip years ago to the Yucatan jungles. This is not really a scientific question, but just a story, a brief story. There was a little monkey there named Bimba. And I really loved this monkey. I spent a week with her in the jungle, and she had diapers on and everything, but I went back a couple of years later where she had matured, and she became really mean. She would steal things and take sunglasses and climb to the tops of trees and put the sunglasses on. And anyway, I don't know why I told you that, but I just saw the question, why are apes and primates, so closely related to us? I was thinking, I looked at Bimbo, wow, she's smarter than I am in a lot of ways. So anyway.
Well, the thing about these primates, they share a lot of their internal structure with us human beings.
Yes.
They have hearts like we do. They've got a liver, they've got a pancreas just like we do.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it's not surprising that a good chunk of their DNA is very similar to our DNA.
Yes.
But there's large chunks that are not. So when you read this account that the chimpanzee is 98% identical in their DNA to humans, that's only looking at a segment of the DNA. If you actually look at the entire genome, it's about 80% similar. Now keep in mind, we're also 27% identical to dandelion DNA. So, and for obvious reasons. I mean,
Really?
all life shares,
Yes.
metabolic processes. So, I mean, you're going to need to have the same DNA. But you were talking about this monkey you met. My own dad had a pet monkey.
Really?
He also had a pet raven. And when he told me as a young boy, is that ravens are way smarter than the apes. And there's a new scientific study I talk about in the book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job,
Yes.
that shows that ravens, for example, are head and shoulders above chimpanzees in their intellectual capability.
Really?
Now, if you're an evolutionist, that means we're descended from the ravens, right?
That's right.
And so this is the point, that we share DNA identity with many different species. For example, the DNA that governs our chemical memory pathways is not at all like that of the chimpanzee, but very close to mice and rats. And for that reason, we're now using mice and rats to develop, chemicals that help us deal with dementia and dyslexia and other mental disorders. We can do that because of this similarity we share with mice and rats. And I argue in my book on Job, God made that DNA identical for one reason, two reasons actually. What's optimal for one species likely will be optimal for many other species. So God simply repeats this ideal design. But the second reason is God wanted us to be able to have a means to develop medical cures for what ails us. And so he gave us these animals.
Isn't that great?
For that purpose.
That's why, Dr. Ross, I think the medical community, and I think those of us who are followers of Christ, we should embrace that. God uses all of our different gifts in great, great ways. Okay, how do dinosaurs fit into the creation of animals? I used to be intrigued by the Loch Ness Monster. And I met one guy that said there's still pterodactyls flying around in certain jungles. I mean, I know that's crazy. I don't want to get you off the subject, Dr. Ross, but.
Well, the Bible is for all generations. And so
Yes.
it uses vocabulary that will communicate to all generations. So there's no mention of Neanderthals in the Bible because we didn't discover them until 1850. There's no mention of dinosaurs because we only knew about them for the last 200 years. Now, where they fit into the creation account, they would fit in between the Cambrian explosion at the beginning of creation, day 5, and God creating birds and mammals. But what you see in Psalm 104 is the claim that every life form that God created here on the earth has a purpose for serving the needs of human beings. And so the dinosaurs lived at a time when the continents, especially here in North America, had these huge shallow seas and lakes, which meant it was possible to have a land animal that weighed more than 50 tons. That's not possible today because there isn't the water to sustain the animal to fight against gravity. So the fact that the buoyancy of the water enabled these creatures to be that big. But what you see in Psalm 104, God always creates with the maximum biomass and the maximum biodiversity. And thanks to these dinosaurs, we have biodeposits that we can mine to sustain global civilization. I mean, when our family celebrates Thanksgiving, we thank God for the sulfate-reducing bacteria. Because of those bacteria, we got metals that we can mine so we can have, cutlery on our Thanksgiving table.
Yes.
I don't know what it's like for your family, but that's what we do.
Oh, that's good. Let me see what else we have. I think you've answered that one. No doubt. Saying the presence of oh, here we go. This is a good one. I think I wrote this. How do you explain the presence of extremely high carbon content, oh yeah, I wrote this, within the Earth's geology at specific times in the geological timeline to form hydrocarbon? And does that contradict the Bible?
Well, I was actually writing on that very subject as I was flying to Dallas today from Denver. So I'm writing a book on why the history of life looks the way that it does.
Okay.
And the whole point is you've got the Devonian era where you've got all these corals, for example, that are driven to extinction but leave all these porous holes. And then you've got these forests on the continental land masses, and there's events that cause it to heavily erode. Well, that gave us a huge quantity of oil because organic material got trapped into those reef porous areas.
Yes.
But during the Carboniferous, which followed right after the Devonian, you have the first really woody forests. And that was a time when virtually all the continents were covered with these very thick forests. And then there was an event that caused all this stuff to get buried underground. That's the coal that we mine today. So thanks to the Devonian and thanks to the Carboniferous, we've got oil, we got coal to launch and sustain civilization. Something else to thank God for on Thanksgiving Day, right?
That's true. And a lot of people in Texas have benefited from the oil, especially. Praise the Lord for oil. Amen. So, here's a good one. Does the Bible or science have anything to say about life on other planets?
Well, the only constraint we have on that is a statement in the book of Hebrews, chapter 9 and 10. The creator of the universe died one time, one place for all. Now, that would not eliminate the possibility that God made dolphins on another planet, but it would eliminate the possibility he created beings like us that are spiritual in nature and in need of redemption. So in that sense, I take the position that we're only going to find spiritual, intelligent life on one planet. And by the way, that's a growing consensus in the community of astronomers. Yes, we're finding thousands of planets outside the solar system, and many of them are Earth-like. But we actually look at these Earth-like planets, they got way too much water and way too thick of an atmosphere to make life like us possible. But there are those that say maybe bacterial life. But there you got the problem. How do you explain the origin of life? Well, there are astronomers that volunteer for us at Reasons to Believe. They say, God is so much enjoys creating, he's not going to stop at one planet. He's going to create life on lots of planets, but it's going to be miraculous that he does that. It's not going to be naturalistic. But then there are people like myself that say God doesn't waste his miraculous powers. He only needs one planet, and one planet with life and intelligent life on it to bring about the work of redemption. And I think what's important for understanding of the creation text in the Bible, every major creation text links creation with redemption. So God creates with redemption in mind, and redemption comes first. God's acts of redemption were put into place before he created anything. So I think that's our guide to interpreting this.
Brilliant.
But I think it's an open issue. We Christians have a variety of options on this.
What would you say in closing? We have just like a minute and 30 seconds left, Dr. Ross. What would you say in closing to someone here, maybe this is their first time, or they would say, I'm the quintessential skeptic. I have all these doubts and questions. What are some things you would say to them, just basically?
Well, first of all, God loves skeptics. I was a skeptic.
Yes.
I consider myself to this day a skeptic. And when I speak to Skeptic Society, I'm always encouraging them to be more skeptical. They're very skeptical about our belief system, but they need to be equally skeptical about the ones they've adopted.
Yes.
Maintain that skepticism. God encourages us to be skeptical, but not cynical.
Yes.
Notice I started off with 1 Thessalonians 5:21. Test everything. That's the skeptic. The cynic, however, when he finds something that passes a test, rejects it anyway. test everything, hold fast to that which proves to be good. And so I would say to the skeptic, you need to be more skeptical. And I would say to the Christian, don't lose your skepticism. Keep asking questions. God called David a man after his own heart, because David throughout his entire life kept peppering God with those tough questions. Read the Psalms. He never stopped questioning God. But God loved that man and said, keep on, I'll give you answers. But what I love about David, he would get angry when God would not answer him right away.
Yeah.
And God would say, you know what, you need to study a little more.
Uh-huh.
You will get the answers. So David was impatient. But what I love about David and what God loved about him, he never quit asking the hard questions. We need to keep that up.
And that is spiritual depth, Dr. Ross, is asking questions of skeptics. Hey, I don't know the answer to that. Then going back, doing research, and then presenting it, and it's just it's a quest. It's a beautiful journey.
Well, for example, I have a lot of atheist skeptics that come to my Sunday school class, and often I'll turn it back to them and say, it's a very good question. Here's some articles you can read. Why don't you research and give a report back to the class? Get them involved in the research and study.
That's right. Brilliant. Well, Dr. Ross, we thank you so very much for being here. We got one more. Wait a minute, one more. You got to read this. This is what my wife texted this question. And Lisa, would you raise your hand? Here's the question. This is a great question, Dr. Ross. How is a man like you so much smarter than a guy like me? That's the question that she wanted me to ask.
Well, I do have an answer for that one. Namely, I've met you for the first time tonight, but one thing I've learned in engaging people, each of us is smart in a different area. And
I believe everybody is.
Yeah.
Everyone who's out there, all of us, human beings.
Well, for example, I'm on the autistic spectrum, and I'm terrible at reading body language and emotions and engaging people. But God has given me this amazing ability to integrate material across many different disciplines.
Yes.
And I used to get impatient with audiences because they couldn't see how the pieces fit together as easily as I do. But then I had to realize, you know what? God has gifted them in ways different from me.
Right.
And also, God has given every one of us a handicap. We all have handicaps, which makes us dependent. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing tonight if it wasn't for my wife. She was the one that trained me how to actually look at people. So,
wow, that's great, Dr. Ross. Thank you again. God bless you. Thank you.